The lock changed overnight. She stood at the door with her key in her hand and it would not turn. She tried it twice, 3 times. A neighbor walked past without looking at her. She knocked. No answer. A notice was taped at eye level, thick paper, official print, a red border she did not need to read twice to understand. She pulled her hand back slowly, stood there, 60 seconds with her key in her fist and everything she owned still on the other side of that door. Her name was Ruth. She was 71 years old. She had lived in that apartment for 9 years. She had never once been late on rent, until the new owner raised it by $400 and gave her 30 days. What does a woman do when the only door she has left won't open? Stay with me on this one. Ruth Calloway had lived a practical life. Not a glamorous one. Not an adventurous one. Practical. She balanced books for a living. She kept records straight. She paid attention to numbers because numbers did not lie to you the way other things did. She had grown up in Dayton, Ohio. Married Gerald at 26. They did not have children, not by choice, just by the way things went. Gerald worked at an auto parts supplier. Ruth kept the books for a small manufacturer across town. Together they made enough to own a small house, take 1 vacation a year, usually somewhere within driving distance, and save a little each month for what they called the future. The future arrived. It just did not look the way they planned. Gerald died of a heart attack on a Thursday morning in February. He was 68. He had eaten breakfast, walked to the door, and then he was on the kitchen floor. The paramedics told Ruth there was nothing anyone could have done. She nodded. She understood. But understanding something does not make it smaller. 6 months after Gerald died, the manufacturing company where Ruth had worked for 32 years announced they were closing the Ohio plant. Ruth was 63, too young for full Medicare, too old to restart in her industry. The pension she had been counting on went into the bankruptcy proceedings and came out at 32 cents on the dollar. She sold the house, paid off the remaining mortgage, cleared Gerald's last medical bills. Then she moved south to a small town in Tennessee because the rent was affordable and the winters were not brutal. She found an apartment, 1 bedroom, 2nd floor, parking lot view, and she stretched what she had as far as it would go. For 9 years she managed part-time bookkeeping for a few local businesses, cash the way small towns work. She was not getting rich. She was staying steady. That was enough. Then the building sold. The new owner was a property company out of Atlanta. They sent letters. The first one was polite. The second was less polite. The third had a number, $412 more per month than she had been paying. Ruth did the math immediately. She always did the math. There was no version of that number that worked. She filed for an extension. She called a tenant advocacy line. She explained her situation. Fixed income, no family nearby, 9 years without a missed payment. The woman on the phone was kind. She was also honest. Without a lease and given the ownership transfer, the options were limited. 30 days. Ruth spent those 30 days selling what she could. The good dishes. Gerald's watch. She held that one until day 29. A rocking chair from her mother's house. When the 30 days were up, she had cleared $400 extra. Combined with what was in her account, she had $1,100 total. She put what remained of her life into the trunk and back seat of her 2004 Chevy Malibu. The car had 182,000 miles on it. The air conditioning worked on one side. The passenger window needed a firm push to close all the way. It was home now. The first night she slept in the parking lot of a Walmart 15 miles from her old apartment. She pushed the front seat back, put a folded quilt behind her head, and did not sleep until 4 in the morning. She was not afraid exactly, but she was aware in a way she had not been since the night Gerald died, that there was no net anymore, no backup, nothing between her and the full weight of bad luck. She was 71 years old and she was starting over from nothing. Now here's the thing about Ruth. She was not someone who sat still with a problem. She was practical. That was the whole point. When something broke, you figured out the next step and you took it. So she made a list. Shelters all full or unavailable. Family, one sister in Arizona, 81 years old, in a memory care facility. Friends scattered, and Ruth was not willing to ask anyone to take on that kind of burden. Government assistance, she applied, but the wait list for Section 8 housing in that county was over 3 years long. 3 years. Ruth read that number and set the paper down. Then she picked it up and read it one more time. She had $1,100 and a car with 182,000 miles on it. She drove the same county roads every day. Not aimlessly, Ruth was not built for aimless. She had a route. Gas station for the bathroom. Library for the Wi-Fi and the warmth. Dollar store for food that could last. She knew which parking lots were safe after dark and which ones had security that knocked on your window at midnight. She learned the rhythms of a life lived mostly in a car. It was small. It was hard. But she was still moving, still watching, still paying attention. 3 weeks into living in her car, Ruth had a rhythm. Not a good rhythm, but a rhythm. She had driven Route 7 probably 40 times in those 3 weeks. It wound out past the edge of town, through farmland, through a stretch of old woods that nobody seemed to own or use. There was a gravel pull-off about 2 miles past the old feed store. She had used it twice as an overnight spot. Secluded enough, no traffic after 10 o'clock. On a Tuesday in October, she pulled off at that spot and noticed something she had apparently driven past without registering. A gate. It was set back from the road about 20 feet, nearly invisible behind a wall of overgrown cedar and wild blackberry cane. The gate itself was iron, old iron, corroded to a deep brown-orange with patches of black where the rust had gone all the way through. It stood about 6 feet high. On each side, old stone posts, stacked fieldstone, the kind someone built by hand a long time ago. A chain looped through the gate and post, but the padlock hanging from it was tilted at an odd angle. Ruth got out of the car. She walked to the gate and put her hand on the chain. The padlock was open. Not broken. Not cut. Just open. As if someone had unlocked it and forgotten to close it. Or as if no one had touched it in so long that it had simply given up holding. She looked back at the road. Nobody. She looked past the gate. A gravel path, more weeds than gravel, wound through the trees and disappeared around a bend about 100 feet in. Ruth stood at that gate for a full 2 minutes. She was not a trespasser by nature. She was a practical woman, a rule follower, a keep-your-head-down type. But she had been sleeping in a car for 3 weeks. And the gate was open. And something about that path, the way it curved just enough that you could not see where it went, made her want to know. She pushed the gate. It moved. It groaned. Loud enough that a bird lifted from a tree somewhere ahead. She stopped. Listened. Nothing. She walked through. The path curved through the trees for about 200 feet, and then it opened up. What was in front of her was a property. Not a field. Not a lot. Property. Old, clearly abandoned. But unmistakably the remains of something that had once been cared for, and cared for well, by someone a long time ago. There was a house. 2 stories. Wood frame, once white, now gray. The porch sagged on the left side. A window on the upper floor was broken. The roof had held, mostly. The chimney was intact. To the right of the house, a barn. Smaller than the house, set back further, with a rusted tin roof that had buckled in one corner but otherwise held. The barn doors were closed. A rusted iron latch, no lock. Between the house and the barn, there was a yard. And in that yard there were things. Boxes. Crates. Large wooden crates, stacked 3 high in places, most of them wrapped in old canvas that had gone dark with age and moisture. Rusted equipment. An old tractor, green paint nearly gone. And something else. Something that caught Ruth's eye and made her stop walking. A row of clay pots along the south wall of the house. 12 of them. Old, thick-walled, sealed with what looked like wax. Cracked wax, very old. Each pot had a marking scratched into the clay near the rim. Ruth bent down and looked at one. The marking was simple, initials and a date. The date was 1943. She stood up straight, looked around the yard again. The crates, the barn, the sealed pots. A property that was not on any map she had ever seen. A gate that had been closed to the world for decades, sitting 2 miles from town. She walked to the barn door, lifted the latch, pulled. Inside, the light was dim but enough, and what she saw made her put both hands on the door frame. The barn was full, not of hay or old farm equipment, full of furniture, chairs, tables, wardrobes, a secretary desk with the writing surface still folded down, stacked carefully, wrapped in cloth, orderly, the kind of orderly that said, "Someone put this here on purpose. Someone put this here and meant to come back." She looked for a name, a sign, some marking that would tell her who this belonged to. She found one, carved into the main post of the barn, about 4 feet from the ground. H. Beaumont EST 1911. That was all. A name and a year. Ruth pulled out the small notebook she kept in her car. She wrote, H. Beaumont, 1911. 12 clay pots, 1943. Barn full of furniture, wrapped, orderly. Gate open. Property off Route 7, 2 miles past the feed store. She was not a woman who jumped to conclusions. She was a bookkeeper. She went where the numbers led. But the numbers she was running in her head right now, standing in that yard, were not adding up to anything small. Old furniture, sealed clay containers, a property that looked like someone had prepared to leave quickly and never came back. She walked back to her car, sat down in the driver's seat, put her hands in her lap. She had found something. She did not know what yet, but she had found something. For the first time in 3 weeks, she slept well that night. She had meant to go to the library the next morning, research the property records, do this the right way. That was the plan. That was the practical thing. But at 7 in the morning on the 3rd day, she drove out to Route 7 and the gate was open wider than she had left it. She had pulled it almost closed when she left. Not locked because the chain was already free, but mostly closed, the way you would close a door you were not sure belonged to you. Now it stood fully open, pushed back against the cedar on the left side. Someone else had been here. Ruth sat in her car with the engine running and looked at that open gate. A long moment. Then she turned off the engine and got out. She walked through quickly, down the path, around the bend, into the yard. Everything looked the same at first. Crates, pots, barn, house. Then she looked at the barn. The iron latch she had dropped back into position when she left was up. The door was open about 3 inches. Someone had been inside. Ruth's heart moved faster than she let herself show. She walked to the barn, looked in. Everything still there, still covered. But a corner of one of the cloth wrappings had been pulled back, on what turned out to be a tall oak wardrobe. The cloth lay on the ground beside it. Someone had looked at it, touched it, and left. An appraiser. That was her first thought. Someone knew this property. Someone had sent someone out to look at it. Maybe to value it. Maybe to prepare to move it. She walked to the house. The front door was not locked. The latch was rusted open. She pushed it and walked in for the first time. She used the flashlight on her phone. The front room, a parlor, had been stripped mostly. Old wallpaper peeling in long sheets. A mantel clock on the fireplace. Stopped. But the back room, the one that had been a study or an office, was different. Against the back wall, a roll-top desk. Old, heavy. The roll was stuck halfway up. Inside, behind the stuck roll, Ruth could see papers. Thick bundles of papers. She had to work at the roll for several minutes. Came free suddenly and slid to the top with a sound like a small thunder. The papers were tied with string. Folders. Envelopes. Documents. Legal documents. Accounting documents. And at the bottom of the stack, a sealed envelope with one word written on the front in old ink. Beaumont. Ruth sat down on the chair in front of the desk. It held her weight. She opened the envelope. Inside was a will, dated 1948, signed by Howard Beaumont and witnessed by two names Ruth did not recognize. The will was detailed, methodical, the way a careful man's will is. It listed the property. It listed the contents of the barn, furniture, antiques, and 12 clay vessels containing financial instruments and personal securities. It named a primary heir, a daughter, Elaine Beaumont, then of Memphis, Tennessee. It also contained a provision. If the primary heir could not be located within 5 years, the estate was to be administered by the county court. The will was dated 1948. There was a stapled note beneath it. A letter from a county attorney, dated 1951. It stated that an attempt had been made to locate Elaine Beaumont. No heir had been found. The estate was therefore pending court administration. Pending. Not settled. Not transferred. Pending. Ruth held the paper for a long moment. A bookkeeper's brain works in specific ways. She had spent 32 years watching accounts close and open, watching financial histories tell stories that people themselves had forgotten to tell. She knew what pending meant when it sat in a record for 70 years. It meant something had fallen through a crack. And now she was sitting at the bottom of it. If you're still with me, and I think you are, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Because where this goes next is something you need to see. She drove to the county library that afternoon. She sat at the public records terminal for 3 hours. The property at Route 7 appeared in county records under the name of the Beaumont Farm, last assessed in 1949. After 1949, nothing. No transfer. No tax lien resolution. No foreclosure. It had simply fallen out of the active tax rolls, the way property sometimes does in small counties when the owner disappears and no one files paperwork. Ruth was not a lawyer, but she had spent enough years with financial documents to read the outline of what she was looking at. The estate had never been probated. The will had been found by the county attorney in 1951, but with no heir located and apparently no one willing to push it through the courts, it had simply stopped. Saturday. For 7 decades. She called a legal aid line from the parking lot that evening. The attorney who answered listened for about 4 minutes. Then she said, "I want to be careful how I say this, but you may have found something real. Don't move anything. Don't touch the contents of the vessels. Document everything with photographs. And come see me in the morning." Ruth sat in the dark parking lot after she hung up. Something real. She was 71 years old. She was sleeping in a 2004 Chevy Malibu. And she had found something real. The attorney's name was Carol Vess. She worked out of a small office above a dry cleaner on Main Street. Ruth had driven past that building dozens of times. She noticed everything now. She brought 43 photographs, taken that morning. Every corner of the property, every crate label, every clay pot, every document from the roll-top desk. She had not moved anything. She had photographed everything exactly where she found it. Carol spread the photographs across her desk and studied them. She was a careful woman, deliberate, not slow. She looked up at Ruth and said, "Tell me exactly how you found this." "From the beginning." Ruth told her. The gate, the open padlock, the path, the barn, the pots. Coming back and finding the barn touched. The house, the desk, the will. Carol listened without interrupting. When Ruth finished, Carol leaned back. "The will is the key," she said. "If it's authentic, it changes what kind of claim is possible. The county never properly administered this estate. That's a failure of the system, not yours. But it means the estate is technically still open. And an open estate can be repetitioned." "By who?" Ruth asked. "By an heir if one exists. By the court as administrator. Or, under certain circumstances, by the finder, the individual who located and documented the assets." Ruth looked at her. "You're saying I could have a legal claim. I'm saying it's possible. I'm not saying it's simple." Nothing was simple. Ruth had stopped expecting simple a long time ago. The will went to a document specialist in Nashville. Came back 2 weeks later, authentic. Ink composition and paper consistent with the late 1940s. Signatures cross-referenced with other notarized documents from that county. A match. The next step was the search for Elaine Beaumont or her descendants. This was the part that could have ended everything. If a direct heir was found, Ruth's claim as finder would have a ceiling, a finder's fee under state law, not the estate itself. That was the fair outcome, and Ruth knew it. She told Carol as much. If the family's out there, they should have it. That's not mine to take. Carol looked at her for a moment. A lot of people wouldn't say that. A lot of people haven't been where I've been, Ruth said. When you've lost everything, you get very clear on what belongs to you and what doesn't. The search took 6 weeks. A genealogical researcher traced Elaine Beaumont to Memphis, then to a marriage record in 1954, then to a death certificate in 1987. No children. The line ended there. Elaine had died with no known descendants and no will of her own. The estate had no heir. Those 6 weeks between petition filing and the appraisal were the longest of Ruth's life. She continued sleeping in her car, continued her rotation of parking lots. She told no one what was happening. Not because she was secretive, but because she had learned that speaking about something before it was real had a way of making it feel less real. She drove past that gate every few days, just to make sure it was still there. One afternoon, a truck was parked on the road when she passed. A man was in the yard, 60s, work boots, flannel shirt. He turned when he heard the gate. "You the one who found this?" he said. "I am," Ruth said. He looked at the crates for a long moment. "I've been past this place 100 times," he said. "Drove by it my whole life. Never stopped." "Neither did I," Ruth said. "Until I did." He nodded, got in his truck and left. Ruth never saw him again. She bought a new padlock that day and locked the gate. Then she stood in the yard alone. This is mine to take care of, she thought. Not in the possessive way, in the responsible way. Someone needs to tend to this, and I'm the one who found it. The contents of the clay pots were assessed by a court-appointed appraiser 6 weeks after the petition was filed. Ruth was allowed to be present. She watched as each pot was opened. Old wax seals cracked with a tool, lids lifted, contents inventoried. Howard Beaumont had been a very careful man. Inside those 12 clay pots were bearer bonds, some of them 1940s war bonds, some private bonds issued by a regional railroad company, along with silver coins, 2 sealed packets of stock certificates, and a quantity of currency. Depression era, mostly. Some earlier. The appraiser worked for 3 days. He produced a report. The assessed value of the clay pot contents alone was $231,000. The barn furniture, the wardrobes, the tables, the secretary desk, all of it was assessed separately. Antique furniture, well preserved, in a category that commanded serious collector interest. A firm from Knoxville spent 2 days in that barn. Their report came in 3 weeks later. $118,000. Ruth sat alone in the parking lot of the library after Carol called her with those numbers. She did not cry. She was not a crier. But she sat with her hands in her lap for a long time. The library closed. The parking lot lights came on. She stayed. $349,000. Plus the property itself, once legally transferred, appraised at $62,000. Over $400,000. Total. Found behind a rusted gate. Off a county road. 2 miles past an old feed store. By a woman sleeping in a 2004 Chevy Malibu with a broken driver's seat spring. The petition was approved by the court 7 months after Ruth first walked through that gate. It was not instant. The county itself filed an interest claim, arguing that as the taxing authority it had priority. Carol fought it. She was precise and methodical and not easily moved. The judge, who had clearly read every word of the documents, sided with Ruth on the central question. Ruth had found the estate. Ruth had documented it in good faith. Ruth had sought legal counsel immediately. Ruth had reported the possible existence of an heir and supported the search for one. The county's claim was legitimate on some points. Back taxes were owed, and Ruth paid them out of the first disbursement. But the finder's claim was stronger. The gavel came down on a Tuesday morning in March. Ruth was sitting in Carol's office when the call came in. Carol said, "Thank you," into the phone, listened for a moment, said, "Thank you," again and set it down. She looked at Ruth. "It's yours," she said. Ruth nodded. She had been sitting with her hands folded in her lap, the way she always sat when she was waiting for something important. She unfolded them, looked at them, folded them again. "Okay," she said. Not a big reaction. Not what you might expect. But here is the thing about Ruth. She had been managing this alone, quietly, for 7 months. She had run these numbers every day. She had already processed the disbelief, the hope, the doubt, the quiet, stubborn belief that it would come through. By the time it actually did, she had no outburst left. Just a deep, settling stillness. She bought a house 3 months later. A small one, 2 bedrooms, on a street with trees. In the same town where she had rented her apartment, actually, about 4 blocks from the building where the lock had changed overnight. She bought it outright. No mortgage. Cash. She did not do that to make a point. She did it because she knew, bone deep, what it felt like to have the place you lived depend on someone else's decision. She was not going to feel that again. The barn furniture went to auction through the firm in Knoxville. It sold better than estimated. The bearer bonds and securities went through a process Carol managed. Some redeemed, some sold to collectors. The currency went to a specialist. The whole process took 8 months from the time the petition was approved. Ruth used the money carefully. She was a bookkeeper. That is what bookkeepers do. She set aside enough for the rest of her life: medical, housing, the costs that come whether you plan for them or not. She hired a contractor to stabilize the old Beaumont house, which she had decided to restore rather than sell. She was not sure what she would do with it yet. Maybe nothing, maybe something, but she was not going to let it fall down. She also did something that surprised even Carol. She found 2 families in the county, through the legal aid organization, who were facing eviction. Ordinary cases. A woman with 2 children whose landlord had raised the rent past what she could manage. An elderly man, 74, who had lived in his apartment for 11 years and was being displaced for renovations. Ruth paid their back rent and their moving costs. She did not meet them in person. She asked Carol to handle it without her name attached. Carol asked why she wanted to stay anonymous. "Because I was in that position," Ruth said. "And what I needed then wasn't someone to turn it into a story. I just needed the problem solved." People ask her sometimes, at the library, at the hardware store, wherever conversation happens in a small town, how she found the place. She always gives the same answer: "I was driving around with nowhere to go." Technically true. She leaves the rest of it alone. Some things are yours to carry quietly. She still drives the 2004 Malibu. She had a mechanic go through it fully, new transmission, new belts, everything checked and replaced. It has 220,000 miles on it now. It runs well. She is not sentimental about it exactly, but she is not ready to let it go. The rusted gate is still standing. She had a metalworker in town look at it, see if it was restorable. He said yes, it would take some time, but yes. She told him to go ahead. She wants it restored, not replaced. She wants it to look like what it is, something old that made it through. Near the end of all of it, when the paperwork was finally done and everything was settled, Carol asked Ruth what she thought about it all. Looking back, Ruth thought for a moment. Then she said, "I drove past that gate 100 times. I never stopped because I never had a reason to stop. But when everything else was gone, when there was nowhere to be and nowhere to go, I finally stopped. And the only reason I stopped is because I had nothing left to lose." She paused. Turns out that's sometimes exactly what you need. The lock that had changed overnight. The key that would not turn. The notice with the red border. None of it felt small anymore. But none of it felt like the end either. It felt like the reason she had stopped at the right moment on the right road on the right day. She was 71 years old. She was just getting started.